Hello and welcome to Happy Hour with me, Eileen Cook, on May 29th. I am recording this after we went online because we were having quite a bit of technical difficulties. So I'm going to answer the questions here so that we have the recording for everyone, and that will hopefully be a little bit better. So first off, in our meeting, we had just a bit of a summary. Tony had been to the Creative Ink Festival, which is a conference held locally here in the Greater Vancouver area. So he was able to share his experience of doing a little bit of sword fighting. And it's a good reminder, I think, for everyone to think about if you want to take some time and set aside some funds to actually attend a writing conference. People know I am not unbiased. I'm a huge fan of the Surrey International Writers Conference, which is coming up here in October. I do know locally here there are quite a few. There's the Willamette Conference down near Portland. There is Emerald City, also coming up in October down in the Bellevue, Seattle area. That leans a little bit romance, but it does have a broad thing as well. And certainly there are conferences held all the way across the country, both Canada and the US. They can be expensive, so it is an investment that you're making. And we will do a whole session, I think, at some point on what to get out of a conference as we get closer to conference season. But I do know that several conferences sell out. So you might want to be checking out if there are conferences that you would like to go to. And if so, putting aside some cash and making that happen. Marianne also brought up the idea of writing with emotion. And she indicated that someone she had talked about doing a guided meditation before sort of starting their writing process and really thinking about the emotions in the scene. And she was curious if that was something that I do. And I can answer for me, I don't. I tend to be very low on sort of what I might call the magic or the woo of writing. I do know there are a lot of authors that have a lot of rituals. So they may have a scented candle, or I know authors who have, for lack of a better term, almost like an altar of things. And so that, they have to be in a certain place, and they might go through something like a meditation to put them in the headspace. That's just not my cup of tea, which doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just a writing style preference. But I do think that the idea of clarifying emotion is really helpful. So one of the tips that I use and do suggest is that for myself, what I will do is once I have a scene that is done and I'm in the revision process, I will go back and I will look at that scene and I will think to myself, what is the scene in this scene? What's the emotion that I want Eileen to be showing? What is the emotion I want Tony to be showing in that scene? And then I will first initially just write that in the margins. So I might put Eileen is feeling intimidated and Tony is feeling angry. And then I push myself to be a little bit more specific, because those big emotions, happy, angry, intimidated, can I be more narrow? Like intimidated is better than just, for example, scared, because it gives me a different feeling than terrified would, or a different feeling than uneasy would. So I'm trying to figure out if there is like sort of a specific emotion I can nail down. Once I've been a little bit more clear with that, then my goal is to underline or highlight on the page, where have I in fact shown that emotion? And I'm curious to see, what have I put on the page? Is the character picking at her fingernails? Are there butterflies in her stomach? Is his jaw clenched? What are the things that would then tip off to the reader, oh, this is the emotions that character is in sense feeling. And I do think that's a really good way to start distilling down, particularly if you're trying to show an emotional change in the scene. So you will hear some advice that says, if a character is starting on a high note in a scene, by the end of that scene, they should be in a low note. And you'll see people even sometimes putting plus and minuses on outlines, trying to show when they're up and when they're down. I'm always leery, as people know, of any absolutes. So when anyone is ever saying, you must do this or you can never do that, I'm almost certainly not going to agree with it. But I do think there is a real value in thinking about what is the emotion and do I have a range of emotions. I'm almost looking for the emotional heartbeat. So it is kind of going up and down. so that the reader is sort of riding that wave along with your character. So taking some time to identify what was the emotion, particularly if you are the kind of writer who tackles things from a plot perspective, which is, again, probably more of my sense of things. So I tend to go in with what is the plot point that I'm trying to communicate in this scene. So when I'm revising, the plot point's almost always there, but the emotion may have been missing. So that's something I want to tackle. And that brought up for Bonnie a different question, which is her own emotion, or what do you do when you're being really hard on yourself? And I think that's a really valuable question to ask. So the first question is why are you being hard on yourself? Hang on, I'm going to cough here. There we go. So I think sometimes we're hard on ourselves, and it is an emotionally based thing. Sometimes we're hard on ourselves fairly. So sometimes we're not doing what we know we need to be doing, and we don't know why. Sometimes we're not doing what we need to be doing, but we kind of know why. I know a few people have struggled with things this past year, whether that's the loss of someone in your family or family strife, and that can really derail your writing. Writing is an emotional process, and I think we have to be kind to ourselves when we're going through that process, and understand that it is normal that if you are dealing with a lot going on, you may not be in a creative space. I love that the cough is still here. So yeah, if you are in a space where you're just not writing, first off, remind yourself that you are a writer. Writing is all things. I've had this discussion with Crystal before, and she may have mentioned it in her session. But to some degree, it's almost like farming. So there's a season when you're actively working the fields, when you are tilling the fields and getting them ready to go. Then the crop is growing. That's you writing words, getting words on the page. Then there's harvesting, which I think of sort of revision. But there may be a time where the field is just sort of fallow and you need to recharge. I think sometimes that's easier to understand if you find yourself between projects. I think it's more difficult when you're in the middle of a project and your own things come up and it derails you and you end up beating yourself up about it. So the first thing to remember is that beating yourself up doesn't help. Being mean to yourself, saying I'm a horrible person, I don't take my career seriously, I'm a failure, that's not helping. It's not going to motivate you to write. You don't need to be an army sergeant to yourself. I think you need to be a little kind to yourself. I do believe that one of the ways to get through difficult emotional times is by journaling. I don't journal all the time, mostly because my everyday life is pretty darn dull. But I do try to journal when things are going difficult because two reasons. One, personally, I think it helps me process and deal with my own emotion. And then secondly, as a writer, I have documented sense of how I felt in that moment. And I think that can be really useful and really helpful. So if you're in a hard spot, I'd encourage you to journal. I'd encourage you to just, for lack of a better term, sort of noodle around with your manuscript. Brainstorm, have some fun with it. If you're not getting pages down, do not beat yourself up and just know that there's going to be a period of time. Also, some people feel like they need to have a deadline. So some of that may be like, are you getting support? You might need to see a counselor. You might need to be talking to friends, but doing something to sort of process whatever is going on in your life. And then have some kind of idea for yourself around like, okay, I'm going to give myself some time to heal, but I'm going to pick this back up at the end of the month and I'm going to try again. And know that it will be hard to start again. It's like going to the gym. When you're going all the time, it's much easier. When you stop going, it's hard to get kind of back into the groove of things. So that can be something that can, in fact, be helpful. Under the good news heading, Tony also got to point out that his book, The God Complex, has now a publication date. So he is in the process of going through that. It'll be spring 2019. And he has a new website, which is www.tonyoliver.com. So people can check that out and cheer him on as he gets closer to his publication date. And that brings me to a question that I got online that I wanted to answer, which is, can you talk a little bit about what is the publication process if you are traditionally published? So I'm going to do that. So in most traditional publishing, but certainly not all, you may have an agent that is working with you. If you're with one of the larger publishing houses, that's probably someone who is sold your work to the publisher, and that person is going to be working with you and can certainly guide you through that process. And I would encourage you to be asking your agent, if you have an agent, about what to expect in terms of timelines and deadlines. I'm going to speak from my own personal experience going through the process. I have worked within a range of publishing houses. So I've worked with Penguin, HarperCollins, Holton Mifflin Harcourt, Simon Schuster, and there are some differences between those, but they're fairly consistent. Keep in mind it's perfectly acceptable for you to be asking questions. Again, if you have an agent, that's probably your first go-to person. But if you don't, it's perfectly fine to be asking questions. I think sometimes we feel like we shouldn't, or we're a little anxious or nervous about asking, but you should feel free to do that. You may want to save up some things. You don't want to be the person who's emailing every day or multiple times a day, like, oh, got another question. So you might want to save them up if you find that you have a lot. But it's certainly totally fine to be asking questions. So once your work has sold, you will be getting a contract from the publisher. What surprised me initially is how long this can take. I have seen this take, for another writer friend of mine, it actually took 9 months by the time the contract was all finalized. The process is often moving along during that, but it can take a while to sort of nail down those contract details. But that's happening on the business side. So you will be getting a paper contract, it might be online, but you'll be getting a formal contract from the publisher. You will turn in your manuscript to the editor. The editor will read your manuscript and then have an editorial letter for you. We talked last time a little bit about, the process of being edited. It can be difficult, like you're so excited that you've sold, that a publisher has your book, and then it suddenly feels like they must not like the book very much because they have all these notes and comments. Keep in mind what the editor is trying to do is to make your piece better. That is 100% their goal. That does not mean that you are going to agree with every suggestion that they make. So that was hard for me to understand, as I don't have to agree with every suggestion, but I should be listening to it. So my advice to people when they get an editorial letter is to sit on it for a good 24 to 48 hours, at least 48 if you can. Because at least for me, initially when I see an editorial letter, my initial thought is panic, which is, I can't handle this. I don't know how to fix those things. That's going to be impossible for me to fix. I'm doomed. The story is doomed. I should run away now. So by taking a little bit of time, my brain starts to think through like, oh, one way I might solve that problem is by doing X or Y. And I'll start making notes. I'll also identify if the editor has a comment that I don't agree with, why is that? So, for example, if an editor is saying, I think you should cut character X, and my initial thought is, no, like you cannot cut character X. This book hinges on character X. Then I try and figure out, why do I feel that way? Is it just emotional? Is there a story purpose that I intended with that character? And then I try to understand, and this depends on the editor, what is it that threw the editor off about that character? Is it that they find the character repetitive? Is it that they don't think the character is likable? Is it that they think there are just too many characters in the book altogether? And the reason that the why is important is that changes your solution. So if, for example, they feel that your character is repetitive, then it may be a case of looking through your cast of characters and seeing, is there a way for me to distinguish character X from the others? So maybe it's a case of I need to make a different backstory or something else. But the role that I saw as important for character X is still there. I just need to shift the characters around them so that X stands out in a better way and that the reader feels connected to character X. If it is a case of they feel there are too many characters in general in the book, maybe I'm going to argue like, okay, I agree with you, but I love character X, so is it possible we could actually get rid of character Y? Or can we combine character Y and character X? So that may be a solution that is possible. Or the other solution is if they're saying, I want you to cut character X because I find them completely unlikable and I hated them every moment they were on the page, then it might be a question of motivation. If character X is doing things that are unlikable, and people who know me know I like me an unlikable character at times, is it at least understandable and relatable? Because if it's understandable and relatable, I think people have a much different feel for that character. So for me, if I can go back and I can understand the reason that the editor is making that comment, I may be able to come up with an alternate solution that the editor hadn't considered. Because again, it's not the editor's job to fix your book, but rather to point out where there are challenges and encourage you to make it better. So once you've gotten your editorial letter, you'll have some period of time to turn in a revised manuscript. Be aware, this could go back and forth between you and your editor 2, 3, 4 times. I've done it twice. I know some people who have done it 3 or 4 times with an editor to get the manuscript right. This is not a case of you failing as a writer. This is a case of making sure you're getting the book as far along as it can be. Now, while all that is happening and you are working with the editor, things are happening in other departments. Their sales and marketing teams are starting to think about where they're going to position the book. They're deciding on a strict publication date. All of that is happening in the background. Once you finish the edits, most likely then they're looking at potentially at making what they'll call an ARC or an ARC, which is advanced reader copy. And that's just an early version of the book that is going out for reviews, possibly for blurbs, and blurbs being those things where someone says, I thought this was genius, says Eileen Cook, author of With Malice. So those may be going out to people to get blurbs. They may be going out to sort of established review places like Publishers Weekly, Kirkus, Romantic Times. Again, anything depending on the book, there's going to be very specific places they'll be sending those. Advanced reader copies can be very helpful because it can help build early buzz. So sometimes you'll see on places like Goodreads where there are reviews and things going up, the book's not even out yet. So trying to build word of mouth before the book even hits the bookstore shelves. This can also be frustrating for the writer because you don't always know who's gotten an ARC. People have mixed feelings about them at times. Some people don't like them. In general, I think advanced reader copies help the author, even though we don't necessarily have control always of where they go. People who are receiving ARCs are not supposed to sell them, are not supposed to be passing them on, because it is an early version of the book. There still may be edits to come. As the author, we obviously want our best work out there, and we also want people to be paying for those things, and they're not paying for ARCs. So it can be frustrating when you see those pop up for sale on places like eBay or Amazon. They're not supposed to do that, but it does happen. But in my opinion, the early version and that chance to build word of mouth is still worth it. So I would encourage people to consider those. The next thing you'll get as the author is copy edits. And copy edits are done by the most anally retentive people, and we love them for it. They're looking for grammar mistakes, passive verbs. They're looking for inconsistencies. So if you call a character with mahogany hair in chapter 1 and light brown hair in chapter 32, it's their job to hopefully flag that and identify that for you. So that's the copy edit process that's happening. Again, at this time in the background, at this point, you're probably seeing a finalized version of the cover. Again, the sales and marketing team are hopefully working to get this out into bookstores and get some early orders in, so you're hoping for that. The last step that you'll get as the author is what's often called galley proofs. These look like how the book is going to do. So the font, the layout, all of that is it. You'll often even see the cropping marks on the actual page. And that is just so you can see what the book is looking like. That is your last chance to catch anything. This does not mean they want you to rewrite things, because it is expensive for them to then go back and relay out the book. So this is, again, is really looking for some kind of error that you want to catch. This is not your chance to be like, I want to change the motivation in chapter 3. That time has come and gone. This is a time to be like, that was supposed to be a comma, or I realized I misspelled the character's name here and it didn't get caught earlier. Once galley proofs have come out, you're almost in the home stretch. On the publishing side of things, at this point, they are now paying to have the books printed. They will be shipped to a warehouse. From the warehouse, they are then shipped to the bookstores that pre-ordered, off to Amazon, so Amazon can, for example, ship out those orders to people. So that is the process. It typically can take up to a year. That's probably what you should expect, particularly at the larger houses. Some of the smaller houses can move faster. Certainly places that are doing ebook only will move faster. The actual part of the print does take time, in often cases because the printing is happening in China and the books are being then shipped back to the States. So there is actual shipping time that you're accounting for. So that has been Happy Hour. Thank you for listening to the recording. Thank you to Tony, Marianne, and Bonnie, who were all in the session. I also saw, I think Peggy was trying to get into the session. I'm going to check and find out what's going on technically, but those hopefully have at least answered your questions. So thank you, everyone. I will see you next week, which will be Tuesday again, and that time will be in the evening. And until then, please keep writing. Thanks so much.